Chair, members of RDC, this is roll call for Resource and Development Committee work session with Kinetic Power LLC and Four Corners Economic Development for Wednesday, April 6, 2022 at 9 a.m. Roll call. Honorable Rick Nez.
Delegate Rick Nez is present.
Honorable Rick Nez is present. Honorable Thomas Walker Jr. Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr.
Delegate Key Allen is present.
Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr. is present. Honorable Herman M. Daniels. Honorable Mark A. Freeland. Honorable Wilson C. Stewart Jr. Chairman, you have two members.
Present.
Honorable
Sorry.
Wilson.
President Freeland. Freeland was muted, sorry.
Honorable Mark A. Freeland is present. Chairman, you have four members available, but you don't need a quorum for this leadership meeting. Back to you.
Mr. Chair, this is Daniels. I'm on the line. Good morning.
Honorable Herman M. Daniels.
Okay, thank you. We do have 5 members on the call, so we'll go ahead and move right along to invocation. I'd like to ask my brother, Honorable Key Allen Begay Jr., if you would do the invocation.
Good morning, Chairman, RDC member, everyone on the line. Good morning, everyone. My apology for not being in attendance in person. But nonetheless, Kodoshiro, so that deals it. Here got ya, Shahumloni Kodo. Another Sikado, another Sikes, Ado Kodo, a large Kodo, or Hindi needle this kage. Nahakulian Gonaniska, Ado Shandin, Lini Ben Hikanat and Slat. Arna Hassan Lini behatted a compe, Bakatni die concat. Behatted a bake a glaggy hand the schneedle of guard con. Adacon hits decent Lini had that Edo Adacodo and it a dish pendant Tanati Cardo. Nicht and Lini benahiti hit arts who could don't go hand Dini de Liscard. Adacodo today committee meeting, Kodo Banali Tido Listo Kodo Resource Development Committee, Nikit Nigo Nabihoba Washington. Based on unbased based on unbased Lodandini Binky Quack Sananitly. Adacodon Hisn Neto, Hisn Dapin Ishing Beta Hot Edo Beta Inisto Adacodona Hassan Lini. Behatona all isto Ado Shandin Lini which under the Kodo. Since Lini the beta Ego would hit Ashin Quack. Anna, though unhidden at the Sato Yutail niche. A coation banet idole, but hot end. It Ashin Quack in non linigin, Hain Lachit Ashi in non linigi. Benedado Benit e Adacon, which Kehonit in arts e Kehonit Conquered Navajo Nation, Kayat in the Bakai. Aaron's Hanada Huiso. Aunt El Kodo Behes Ani Adat Edo Adalia. Aunt Ego Kodo Banana Shadayasan county officials, local chapter officials, out of the government, the Navajo Nation government, out of the state government. And Lego Huyen Ago Kodo Nasan as Ande Aunt out Nang Linigi. But the wet after Pandat Ago Lange did our bandai, Nation has Anka. I would end the Kodo going back on the Navajo Nation, Joshi. It nan Liniki, it Ashin Payat E, Fiat E. At Egoshin Papa Nate into Papa Nat into Histon and Nakibinia Quagate it Kodo. Meeting none it on another seat of God. But I would end the Kodo going back to us, God. Committee members, Chair, Vice Chair, Kodo. Nashkan Lord God, Kodot Ashonda, whatever they're going through, whatever they go through, has the God assure them you're there for them. Assure them that everything will be okay. God, at the end, God, we just need to continue to put our trust in you, have faith in you, continue for your guidance, your wisdom, your knowledge. Through every trial, tribulations, Shake enough, you get the nigger did I could on Hassan and Ben Hitch a young God. Did ego sheet with the God that's shown. Bless each and every one of my committee members. Bless their loved one, their spouse, their children, their grandkids, the relative, hit Ashin has aunt the God that's shown. But Jane Lean hit Ashin hit Ashin. Bennett and hit Ashin Kotobe Chen has it. But sees the baby Chen that we God as shown that addition don't watch it hit Ashin Kage. Nana Zan did added I don't have to double it neither don't let God. But the Lord Jesus did ego Koto on to go. Na in the street on to go into on the has case God Halle. Ask for the Benish under the Belanish under Halland the day. Belahn ang go baby na go kodo or at on an another less God could eat a kodo so the Zenlini be has seat or less better each and every one of our staff a carton that cut the God the Kodovas and that Whitney and the hit Ashi banana shit I used in as to our with a God about the whole year. The Kodori chapter officials and community members, the government speaker, president, chief justice, our veterans. Or elderly. Graduation of another hot seas God, what Elkodor, and then Lineage, another God. Other Kong is not Lineage God, and his aunt Queen Lad or Little Lord. Ask for the Kobake at the 13th baby, and show with the notes, ask for the couldn't Zabi, the Bakadi, the hot eight of the whole list or list. We hit the nigger being hit a young case, just a matter of us, God, Kodo, just being prepared. Just continue to have our trust and our faith in you, God, with ego Kodo. The Binibi and Kodo to the behind say, Nego could I shaho given us it aha sit only. I don't know, Zamba Kai can't need any sitting and in the case any. Each and every one of them, they have their own faith. It Ashin so the sin, it's just a matter for us to have an understanding. Benit Edo be cut nature be nasi kaka dit ego kodo. Kajashi cut the day chihinati needle chinati and she needs and she but a lot of time it takes patience. But a lot of times always have to be kodo ben na on ta she na it asate. Halat ask for the kodo. Baby natchet kodo shokna needs and do baby natchet. Shout that's not the consecution be that I hate that I Lord God at in a kotodo. Oh, here and need for everything that you do for us, everything that you've done for us, and everything that will be done for us, Carla. Is can't on watch it at the husband that asks for you, but we'll continue to ask koto yat inan dini yat hini nado lihti no ekodon cheko. He needs and do bench na ini kanka at I koto. Ben so it koto to the Zenlini behasi to lift over Lahashlab or Shland and the data to the Shakahasun Tongo Kuyat hit I koto and Hanin Anto list at Gar. The Tego koto to the Zenlini behasi to lift me Asani Snibinach dita I koto hasi to this in Jesus' name. Amen. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Honorable Begay, for the prayer. Yat ehon chatsadans and koroshin ben nachin satni tlin certainly appreciate it. So let's move along here. On the agenda, we have introductions. Let's start with RDC members. I believe Honorable Vice Chair Walker is at his appointment, so we'll go to Honorable Daniels. Honorable Daniels. Honorable Begay.
Mr. Chair, this is Daniel.
Honorable Daniels, go ahead.
Yes, yes. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and the colleagues, your staff. Herman Daniels Jr. is don't mention but Kitachini, that's has got so that's another toy Lenny, that's what that mention or not as on or jet to shan to that be Kenny Banashnish or that is a house of state or Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Daniels. Honorable Keelan Begay Jr.
Chairman, good morning, Nana. Good afternoon, Nana. National key on the Edashire 5 chapters that I represent from the central part of the Navajo Nation. Low Mountain, Kachibu Gap, Chalana, Cottonwood, Nonslini, and many farms, Deet I, Kwadosh, and Anish Instant Chairman, Deet Anish Dasa. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Honorable Begay. Honorable Freeland.
Chairman, good morning, Shalanta, colleagues and staff. Thank you for that prayer, brother. Really needed it this morning. Shay Mark Freeland, Nishiro, Dofanigi Tutsoni, slowed up Kia Ani, Asia, Sandra Canada, Tana Bessie Edishnala, Conti Osika Action and Besenti this morning. I represent Crown Point, Nahadiskish, Sehai, Besenti, White Rock, Lake Valley, Herfano, and Nayeze. I'm going to be off and on the call, Chairman. I am making my way north to Herfano or to Naizi and Herfano this morning. So, Edia, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland. Honorable Stewart.
Good morning, Chair. I don't that question. I can't I don't the staff. I don't hear from the this morning for our RDC meeting here in Farmington. I wasn't there in person because I went and caught cold over the weekend. I didn't want to freak out anybody thinking I had something else, so I stayed home. But I do represent 4 chapters: Sawmill, Red Lake, Crystal, and Fort Defiance. And what's on the age? Not as coaching, but just change coaching. That's a W to the Chanela. Thank you for the prayer this morning. So we always start our meetings with a good prayer to start off our day. I'll control, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Stewart. Shay, you have Rick Nez in Chia. Oh, what's on in Sla? Oh, Zay Kachin, Bushes Chain. Sana Bish Mesha Chado can't on it. I should not have 8 and then Sla. I represent 6 chapters: Hogback, San Juan, and Nizad, Upper Fruitland, Burnham, and Newcomb. Welcome, everybody. We'll move right along to RDC staff. Mr. Tai.
Good morning, Chair, members of RDC. My name is Rodney Tahi. I'm the Legislative Advisor for Resource and Development Committee. I'm Kiani and Senja Kene, and I'm originally from Steamboat, Arizona. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Whitty. Ms. Whitty. Ms. Heather Springer. Ms. Khan.
Chairman, Ms. Khan will not be
Yes.
joining us today. She's sent an email earlier this morning indicating that she's going to be in the office today drafting and researching legislation for the committees today. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. From Speaker's Office, Ms. Yako.
Hello, good
Ms.
morning. Can you hear
Yako?
me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and members of RDC. My name is Melinda Arvizo Siako. Tsina Janine Shlonki Ani Bashichin, Twitch Ini Dashichedo Dashchini Dashanale, Legislative Staff Assistant for the Office of the Speaker here in Winter Rock, Arizona. Thank you for having us on the call. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have anybody from the Office of the President and Vice President?
Good morning, Chair.
Morning,
Chair.
Honorable Freeland. Phil Fred, go ahead.
Oh, Oh, yeah, Chair and members of Resource and Development Committee, staff, and everybody listening in. Davis Filford from Office of the President, Vice President, Executive Staff Assistant. And I'll be listening in as well as tomorrow.
Thank you. Ms. Clashen? Okay. Anybody from the Department of Justice? None? We do have somebody from the Water Rights Commission, Dr. Crystal Tully Cordova.
Yat Bennett, Chair, do honorable members of Resource and Development Committee and those listening online. Ashe Crystal Tully Cordova Yanashet Woodage Eatney Nishlant Katnezatni Bashish Chin Hashkan Hitzoha Edashichet Wohe Queenie Edashanale, the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, Banashnish, and I'm a principal hydrologist there. Thank you.
Thank you. Representatives of Kinetic Power.
Good morning. My name is Tom Conroy, and I will introduce myself in a little bit more depth in a moment, but I'd like to say to the honorable members of the R&D committee and all of the other attendees from the Navajo Nation government and others, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for your attention to this project. Tracy, can you introduce yourself?
I'm here. I'm Tracy Livingston. How's my audio? I'm talking by satellite, so there might be a delay.
It's good.
Okay, thanks for everyone for attending this important, very important meeting for Pump Storage Hydroelectric. We're excited to talk about this opportunity for the nation. Thank you, Chair, for putting this together and for all the attendees. And I look forward to answering your questions to how long ever it takes and educating everyone about the project at hand and our background and what we bring to the table. Thank you very much.
Next. Mr. Arvin Trujillo, are you on the call?
Arvin's not here today. This is Tom Taylor. I'm here representing Four Corners Economic Development. Been working with Kinetic Power on this project for a couple of years at this point. Anyway,
Mr. Trujillo, Arvin, we could barely hear you.
Let me try again. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, but it's still kind of low.
My name is Tom Taylor. I'm representing Four Corners Economic Development. Arvin is unavailable today. I've been working with Kinetic Power for about 2 years on this project. Anyway, so I'm here representing 4CED this morning.
Welcome, Mr. Taylor. Good to hear from you and appreciate the work that you do. Next.
Yat Ben, Chairman Ness, the Resource Development Committee, though I don't know that's not time. Share your microphone, this is your mic. But I mean, small, she was chain call functionality on the chair. Without that, you get care for higher on this not here. Good morning, everyone. Mike Solana, Department Director for the Navajo Land Department.
Morning, Mr. Halona. Thank you. Mr. Pete City.
Good morning, Pete Actity with Eden Tribal Government Relations Manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. I hear none. We'll go ahead down to number 2 on the agenda, purpose of the work session for today. The Resource and Development Committee will be conducting a work session with Kinetic Power LLC and Four Corners Economic Development to discuss the Carrizo, Four Corners, Baclabato Hydroelectric Energy Storage Center project and the scope of opportunities for the Navajo Nation. We do have the PowerPoint sent to us, honorable colleagues. So we'll go ahead down to number 3 on the agenda for the presentation and discussions. Presentation will be by Kinetic Power LLC, Four Corners Economic Development on the Carrizo Four Corners Hydroelectric Energy Storage Center project. So you do have the floor at this time, Kinetic Power.
Thank you, Chairman Nez. Again, this is Tom Conroy. Would you forward one slide, please? And we'll jump right in. There is, as you said, a presentation that Rodney sent around. Thank you, Rodney. And I would just like to set the stage, though, that we would prefer for this to be a discussion with questions and comments and suggestions rather than a one-way presentation. So please don't hesitate to jump in, ask us to slow down, ask us to speed up, etc.
Thank you for that, Mr. Conroy. Honorable members of RDC, as Mr. Conroy had stated, you're more than welcome to ask questions as we go down the PowerPoint presentation. So, Mr. Conroy, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Nez. Would you go forward on this one, please? The first thing we would like to do, my partner and I, is introduce ourselves in a little more detail. I will start with myself. I arrived in the Four Corners area over 40 years ago and spent 2 years here actually working on the Four Corners and San Juan power plants for a company called Foster Wheeler that was, even at that time, more than 40 years ago, installing pollution mitigation low NOx burners, which we successfully did install. Other experience, my partner and I, between us, have over 50 years actually of experience in the energy, the power generation sector, both on the equipment side and the project development side of the business. Another notable thing on this second slide, I think this is page 3, up at the top left, you can see a wind turbine tower, which my partner Tracy Livingston innovated, and I joined up and helped him to commercialize. We ultimately sold that tower to General Electric, and that's a particularly large example there, 140-meter hub height tower that was put up in Germany. More recently, I was president of Array Technologies in Albuquerque for 3 years, and we had substantial success there. The company sells, it's the second largest global provider of solar trackers, which are fundamentally the support structure for the solar projects, like you see in the lower left half of this picture. And during that 3 years, we delivered about $1 billion worth of these support structures, these trackers, into projects around the world. And Tracy, if you are, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Tracy Livingston. I'm a partner with Tom Conroy and Kinetic Power. We're both the 2 principal partners in the business. And we formed this company for the specific purpose of developing pump storage hydroelectric in cooperation with the Navajo tribe. My background is, my education is aerospace engineering. I have a bachelor's in aerospace engineering with a minor in mechanical engineering. I've been involved in entrepreneurial startup businesses my entire 35-year career. I got involved in wind development in 2003 and formed a company called Wasatch Wind. Wasatch Wind went on to develop Utah's first wind farm in Spanish Fork, which was a success. The governor was involved, the city of Spanish Fork was involved, the mayors were involved in the region. It was quite a popular and exciting endeavor for the community. And then from that, I raised significant amounts of money, and we went on to develop a wind farm in Glen Rock, Wyoming, which is 60 megawatts. And then a wind farm you may be familiar with. We were the early developers in the wind farm in Monticello that you see on the hillside there as you drive through town. Tom and I were involved in that company as the principals of Wasatch Wind, and also the spinoff company called Wind Tower Systems, where we developed these very tall wind turbine towers, and ultimately that technology was sold to General Electric. And then we formed this company, Kinetic Power, after these endeavors, and we're here today to talk to you about it.
Moving on to slide 4, this is the one where there's a picture of the United States. The fundamental background, the genesis of this actually Carrizo project began a few years ago when we began studying how can we significantly help to impact economic development in New Mexico and across New Mexico and Arizona. And we did quite a bit of work based on the history we have across wind and solar and other power plants, and did the analysis and actually discovered that New Mexico ends up having the lowest cost of renewable electricity in the United States. Now, as everybody on the phone knows, this is quite a big deal because of all the initiatives and pressure and momentum to try and switch our electric system to a lower polluting, no carbon system. And we couldn't be in a better place than having the lowest cost, the ability to build the lowest cost, no carbon systems. And so what we just wanted to set as a little bit of a background to this Carrizo project is the opportunity as we see it for the project is very large, but there is actually a much larger, in fact, an ongoing opportunity, which would be to build out this infrastructure that does deliver reliable and lowest cost, no carbon electricity in the United States. And there are industries that are listed on the right in somewhat in order that are very large electric consumers and therefore are highly interested or highly incented by having low cost, no carbon electricity. And just one point here of clarification, if you go to some states in the United States, in order for them to decarbonize, their electric rates are going to end up being double or triple or even more what we can accomplish here across New Mexico and Arizona. And so some of the industries that are explicitly and interested in decarbonizing, of course, data centers are at the front of the list. Hydrogen is a big opportunity for this area, and I know the nation is aware of this and looking at it, as is New Mexico and a lot of other states. But hydrogen, in order to make green hydrogen, the input cost is 60 to 80% electricity. And in order to make green hydrogen, of course, you need green electricity. So it's quite apparent the economics of hydrogen are driven by the cost of the wind and solar input. Ammonia is a very big deal. I know there's a lot of farmers and ranchers on the nation, and you have seen, I'm sure, the big increases in fertilizer prices that either already have hit or are coming. And so ammonia is another opportunity, either as a fertilizer or also a hydrogen carrier, to be able to move, in fact, hydrogen. It makes a lot of sense potentially to mix it with ammonia. The polysilicon industries, the aluminum, the plastics, et cetera, et cetera. I won't read the list to you, but the opportunity, the point we're trying to make is that the opportunity is larger than just the single Carrizo project. It enables development or pursuit with great credibility of a lot of these other industries. Any questions or comments on that?
Honorable members of RDC, any questions? Go ahead.
This is Tracy again. Just one other comment Tom touched on this slide. Most of these industries rely on either electricity directly, which generally is from coal plants and natural gas power plants, or they rely on natural gas or coal directly to run their processes. For instance, ammonia, typically in the world, 99% of all ammonia, which is the principal ingredient in fertilizer around the world, it's said that ammonia contributes the fertilizer contribution from ammonia contributes to something like 80% of all fertilizer use around the world. And it's the principal reason why agriculture and food products are cheap around the world today. Unfortunately, ammonia is produced, 99+% of ammonia is produced directly from natural gas and coal. And the result of that is, for instance, about 2 to 3 metric tons of carbon are emitted into the atmosphere from those processes per ton of ammonia that's produced. So it's an incredibly dirty industry. And many of these on the list are that way. And the opportunity is with being able to use solar and wind in combination with storage, which is critical for these processes so they can run 24/7, reduces the carbon emissions by over 99%. Thanks. Back to you, Tom. Any questions?
Yes. How did you say, you indicated something about coal? Could you touch up on that coal again?
Yeah, some of these processes use coal. For instance, polysilicon processes use coke as a raw ingredient. Coke is a product of coal. So coke is used to make polysilicon and silicon products. And polysilicon you might know of as the raw ingredient in the solar cells, the black cells you see on a solar panel. That's the refined product of basically a sand and a heat process. And in order to make the raw ingredients silicon metal, you have to use large quantities of coal. And some of these other processes as well. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I do appreciate the response. That's amazing to hear that coal still can be used to put all this together. So thank you.
Okay. Moving on to slide 5. Well, get into the project itself. And Tracy, would you please walk through this slide?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So pumped storage hydroelectric, in the most simplistic explanation, is a very giant battery. It's in some ways no different than the battery in your car. It stores energy, electricity in the form of in this case, water, potential energy water using gravity. So it stores energy, and the energy comes from the grid all over New Mexico. The principal energy that we would like to use for this project to store electricity is energy from sun, from solar panels, and from the wind through wind turbines. And we would take the energy that's being produced when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and we would deliver that electricity through the grid from remote spots all over New Mexico. And we would run that electricity through hydro turbines, just the same types of hydro turbines that you would see in, say, Glen Canyon Dam. The difference is we simply run those hydro turbines backwards. When we want to use those turbines, instead of generating power, we use them as pumps, and we take the electricity from those renewable energy resources, run the turbines backwards, and we pump water from a lower reservoir and pump it uphill through a series of tunnels down deep in the mountain. And we pump that water and fill a reservoir in the upper part of the mountain. And this period of time can range from 2 or 3 days to over several weeks, that we might be pumping more water up the mountain than we're pumping down through the turbines. And so we store energy in an upper reservoir and move that energy to the top of the mountain when there's extra power to be used on the grid. And we store that energy as potential energy. And then when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, we take that water that's in the upper reservoir and we run it through these long tunnels down deep in the mountain, run it through the hydropower plant, generate electricity, and put the water in the lower reservoir. And this cycle repeats periodically from upper reservoir to the lower reservoir, and then from the lower reservoir back to the upper reservoir. And we just move this water back and forth. And that's called a closed loop system. It means that neither one of these reservoirs is on a navigable river. They're separate and removed from any other water source once we've initially filled up the lower reservoir at the beginning of the operation of the project. And then we move that water back and forth. So one principal criteria for economically viable pump storage projects is the elevation difference between the lower reservoir and the upper reservoir. You want as high of an elevation difference as possible. So it's preferable to have that lower reservoir way down deep in a valley and the upper reservoir in a very high mountain. And the location that we have found, we spent probably 6 months looking for a location that had the highest elevation gain in the shortest distance. And by far the best location we found in the entire state of New Mexico and in Arizona is on the top of the Carrizo Mountains near Pastora Peak. If you see on the slide, you'll see that the elevation difference is 3,314 feet. Let me put that in perspective for you. The further water falls, the more energy there is in every gallon of water that you run through the hydro plant. So the greater the height, the smaller the reservoirs need to be, and the smaller amount of water we need to use. So if you compare that to, say, Glen Canyon Dam, Glen Canyon Dam, the water falls a little over 500 feet. In this project, it falls over 3,000 feet. That means we can get 6 times the energy out of each gallon of water that goes through the turbines as the energy in Glen Canyon Dam. Now, the hydro plant is in similar size to Glen Canyon Dam's hydro facility inside that dam, if you've been through that tour. Slightly bigger, but it looks almost the same when you look at the powerhouse. The only difference is this project puts that powerhouse way down deep under the ground, where, of course, Glen Canyon Dam's powerhouse is inside the dam itself. As a result of this process of having this very large elevation gain, this puts this project with the highest elevation difference of any pump storage hydroelectric project in North America, and the second or third highest elevation gain in the world. So it is one of the most efficient for using water in the entire world. Any questions on that? Well, let me make one other comment. As a result of all of this, we use very little water, and the amount of water we do use some water, and it's basically the water that is evaporated in the upper and lower lake we have to replace periodically, and that's a little over 2,600 acre feet of evaporation every year. That's just to put that in perspective, that's about 5% of the Four Corners and San Juan coal plant water usage.
If I could jump in.
These projects take, go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish. Sorry.
Go ahead, Tom.
You finish.
No, the only one last point is these projects take a very long time to construct, principally because of the tunnels. There's approximately 24 miles of tunnels that have to be constructed under the ground, and then a powerhouse has to be excavated under the ground as well. One thing of note on these projects is the only thing that you will see above ground is 2 lakes, a small substation, and a small overflow basin that's maybe 75 to 100 feet in diameter at the top of the vertical shaft, and a series of roads just to get to each of the dams for construction and operations. Back to you, Tom.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one additional comment. On these metrics you see on this slide, Tracy talked about the water usage in terms of evaporation and why this project is among the most water efficient in the world. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, is that this metric of 70 hours at 1,500 megawatts. Now, 1,500 megawatts is about equal to the Four Corners power plant total output for the both of the remaining coal plants there at full output. The 70 hours is completely unique in terms of these pump storage hydro projects, and it would run the PNM system, it alone, for about 4.5 days on running on their 2019 average load. This delivers what's called seasonal duration storage. You get to the 50, 100, 150 hours of duration. It is perhaps the most important metric for these pump storage hydro projects. There are 22 pump storage hydro projects in existence across the US, many more across the world, but The projects built in the US were all built about 50 to 60 years ago adjacent to nuclear plants with the purpose of letting the nuclear plants run at constant base load output. And then at night, when load would drop, they would pump up to the reservoir and because they had excess power. And in the day, when the load increased, they would run the water back down. Now, you will, I'm sure everybody on the phone has heard about pump storage hydro projects. There are somewhere around 30 or more that are working to reach commercial operation in the Western US. If you look at those projects, you'll find they have an average duration of about 11.5 hours. Nowhere across the United States is there a project with this 70 hours of duration. And what we are trying to do is anticipate what in fact is needed in 8 to 10 years during the time it takes to build this project by utilities who by that time are trying to, as you all know, to get to higher and higher levels of decarbonization. And just a supporting point on this, Public Service of New Mexico has submitted to the New Mexico PRC filings stating that they believe that in order to reach higher decarbonization levels, they will need to have storage facilities with 4 to 5 days of storage for their system in order to reach those higher levels. And so PNM is definitely interested in this capability and is interested in this technology. Pete, I don't know, I don't put you on the spot if you want to add to anything to that?
No.
Okay, all right. Any, one final thing, it talks up there about the number of miles of tunnels to be excavated. You can see an example of the very large powerhouses associated with these facilities in the picture on the top right. The tunnel on the right, these tunnels are around 21 feet in diameter. These are not small tunnels at all. This is a very large construction project. And our hope is that we have, in fact, very skilled miners in the area that can be applied to make this project a success. We have that skill set here already from all the decades of coal mining. Could I just ask, we covered a lot of material here. Are there any questions or comments?
Yes, this is Delegate Rick Miz. On this slide here, at the very top right, generator turbine, and then you look a little bit to the left, it says power station, 6 turbines. Will it require 6 turbines at the Carrizo Mountain? That's my first question. My second question is, for the Carrizo project here in Baclavato, is it exactly 24 miles from the top of the mountain to San Juan River? Is that how many miles it is? And then my third question is, you stated there's 22 hydro pump electric in the USA. Where is the nearest hydro pump station near here? Where's the closest one near us here? Thank you.
I'll answer the third question and then ask Tracy to answer the first two. There are, I believe, 2, at least one pump storage hydro projects located up in the mountains just west of Denver in Colorado that have been there for, again, 40, 50, 60 years. I'm not precisely sure how long. So that would be without looking at the detail, I will take that as an action, Chairman Nez, to get you an answer if they're any closer. So that would be my response on that. Tracy, would you please address Chairman Nez's 2 other questions? Sounds like we might have lost Tracy. Okay. I
No,
will.
I'm here. I just had to find, I just had to find the unmute. Thank you,
Okay.
Chairman Nez, for asking those questions and bringing that up. Those good questions. First question, how many turbines are there? Turbines generally range from about 250 megawatts to 350 megawatts each. And this facility has a total output of 1,500 megawatts. So the number of turbines ultimately will be determined by just the number of factors that determine how many turbines ultimately wind up with. Do we go with bigger turbines and fewer of them? So there could be as few as 5. There could be as many as 7. Just depends on the final availability of turbines and the economics of those turbines and the hydraulic design of the facility. Your next question was how many miles of tunnels and how far from the San Juan River. The tunnels are, there's 3 basic characteristics. There's an upper tunnel that's horizontal. That is a low pressure tunnel. It's concrete lined. It's approximately 3 miles from the upper reservoir to the vertical shaft. And that vertical shaft then is approximately, well, it's 3,300 feet. So that's 2/3 of a mile approximately, but that's vertical. And then there's a low pressure tunnel at the exit of the powerhouse, and that's approximately 4.5 miles distance. So the total distance of one tunnel is approximately 8 miles, a little over 8.5 miles of tunnels. There are 2 tunnels minimum. So there'll be two, one next to each other. That's based on water velocities required to reduce the water velocity for longevity and also for redundancy if there's ever a problem with one of the tunnels. So, and there may be even a third one. So the 24 miles is a conservative high number. It could be as short as approximately 16 to 17 miles of actual tunnels. And those tunnels just run from the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir. That doesn't include the pipeline that runs from the San Juan River to the lower reservoir. That pipeline is a water fill pipeline. It's approximately 2.5 feet in diameter. There'll be a pumping station at the river or adjacent to the river. And that pump facility will operate approximately 24/7 for 1.5 to 2 years to fill the lower reservoir till it's full. Once that's full, the amount of water flow that comes from the river is a very tiny fraction. It's less than 10% of the water requirement when we're filling it. And that water is for just making up annual evaporative losses. And that water from the San Juan River may be a seasonal water intake to the facilities and into the lake to make up for evaporative losses, depending on water flows in the San Juan. It may be in high water, so it doesn't have as much effect on fish and stream flow issues that are part of the San Juan Water Stream Flow Commission. So it's going to it has a lot of optionality and variability to minimize impacts. And that pipeline is approximately 11 miles long, but it's just to make a distinction, that's a pipeline and not a tunnel. President Nez, does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you very much. I also have another question. The 392 acres that the lake will be holding the water. Perhaps Mr. Tom Taylor can answer my question because I live near Morgan Lake over here at Four Corners Power Plant. I look at the lake all the time and I drive by on N36. approximately, I can't visualize 392 acres of water. So if I were to look at Morgan Lake, how much is it? A third, 2/3, or half of it? Thank you.
Chairman Nez, I can't answer that specifically. I know that the upper reservoir is significantly smaller in surface area than Morgan Lake. It's considerably deeper. I really don't know. Let's see, I think it's 2.5 miles long.
It's 1,200 acres.
Huh?
1,200 acres.
It's 1,200 acres. So this is 1/3 the size, surface area.
Both reservoirs would be about 926.
Okay, thank you. Honorable members of RDC, do you have
I
any
have one
questions?
comment on that.
None? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Tracy again. I have one comment on that. The reason the lakes are very small, it's an enormous amount of power, and the lakes are very small. Many people are surprised to hear how small they are, and that's directly a function of this elevation gain difference between the upper and lower reservoir. If the elevation between those two was half, for instance, it would at least double the size of those lakes, double the amount of water use. It would double the costs. I've been asked from time to time to evaluate pump storage in Arizona and New Mexico and look at other project areas. And I've also looked at other developers that are attempting to develop other projects, and their elevation gains are substantially less. Some are so much smaller in elevation gain and their cost would be so much more. I know from an engineering perspective, they'll never get built. They're just too costly and not competitive. This is a very, anything to do with electrical infrastructure, it's a commodity product. Electricity is commodity product, and therefore all the generation assets are commodity products. And the cost is everything. The cost is very important for success. So we see developers without the knowledge or understanding of some of these metrics trying to develop projects that Kinetic Power and Tom and I both know will have very little chance of success. So we've identified a site for the highest probability of success with the lowest water use in the most efficient manner.
Thank you.
Back to you. Any questions?
Then we'll move
Honorable
on.
members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions? I hear none. You may proceed.
Thank you. We thought the next piece of information to be of value is to describe exactly where this project is. And Tracy, I'll once again ask you to walk through this map, please, if you would.
Thank you, Tom. I'd be happy to. So if you, just to orient everyone, Tisnas Pass is in the upper left corner near the north arrow. And the north is up on this map. So, and then on the far right is the 3 substations next to the 2 power plants. So Four Corners substation and power plant is in the far right lower portion of the map. And in the far right, a little bit north of there, you can see the San Juan generation substation identifier. And then the 3rd substation is just west of that one, which is the Shiprock substation. Those will be important as we describe this map. To the far west of there, west of Baklabatuo, you'll see on the map, are the 2 reservoirs. The far left reservoir is the reservoir that's in the upper part of the mountain. It's at just less than 9,000 feet elevation and just slightly north of the peak there. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the peak again.
Sure.
The lower reservoir is just east of that, about approximately, as the crow flies, about 7 miles. That's at an approximate elevation of 56 to 5,700 feet. It's in where the dam would be located for the lower reservoir is in a narrow constricted sand wash, so that the amount of material for dam construction is minimal. That dam will be approximately 200, a little over, I believe, 200 feet in height. The upper reservoir dam in the far left there will be significantly higher than that, over 400 feet. At this point, the early engineering is not refined enough to know whether those two dams will be earthen dams or some kind of rock fill or concrete construction. That's awaiting further engineering. So the tunnels would run almost directly in the shortest path between the upper and lower reservoir. They're not shown on the map, but halfway between those two reservoirs will be a small substation and a worker and construction access tunnel that will go from near the substation down into the heart of the mountain where the power station is. From that substation, there are two preliminary proposed paths for transmission lines. And keep in mind, these are, at this point, proposals based on basically engineering principles more than they're based on location for minimal impact to the community. That would be subject to further review to determine final locations. So these are at this point more for discussion purposes than an absolute requirement of location. There will be two transmission lines. The transmission lines are similar to the ones that you would see, the largest ones that emanate from the Four Corners coal plant or the San Juan coal plant, the steel lattice open frame towers. For those that are interested, there are 345 kilovolt transmission lines. There are two of them. They're separated approximately 800 feet apart, so that if one line fell down, we'd still have full redundancy and be able to deliver the power as needed in the face of an ice storm or ice storms and high winds, and one tower came down, it wouldn't take both lines down. So it does require redundant power line infrastructure by regulation. Those two lines you see coming from the substation on the left side of the map between the two reservoirs, and they run due east. Those are the magenta lines, and those transmission lines then diverge at some point, and one of them goes north on a north route. That's transmission line A on the map, and that transmission line terminates at the Shiprock substation. And then there may be, we don't know until we do further transmission studies, there may be an upgrade of the line from the Shiprock substation to the San Juan substation. And that if there was an upgrade to that line, it could either be larger conductors or it could be a parallel path transmission line. That line A, is proposed at this point to follow above an existing transmission line that runs through Shiprock as it crosses the river. The second line, called line G to the south, diverges from line A approximately halfway to the Four Corners coal plant, runs south as far away from the Shiprock monument as we could place it, and it terminates at the Four Corners substation. For discussion purposes ongoing, we have an alternative north path called line A1. That's a very preliminary path that goes away from the town of Shiprock and as far away from as many homes and community infrastructure facilities as possible. And it intersects an existing WAPA line to the north and then parallels that WAPA line all the way back to the Shiprock substation. And then there is a alternative path called G1. That's an alternative to the primary line G on the map that is further south, that is further away from homes, but closer to the Shiprock monument as one alternative. Any questions? I know that's a lot.
Yes, I do have a question. This is Delegate Rick Nez. On the map where it says the Clabato, you go south a couple blocks and there's a pond of water. And then you go to the southwest there's another pond of water. Will it be the one to the west, or what is those ponds of water there? Thank you.
The pond of water I think you're referring to that's due south of Baklabatwo. Is that the first one you're talking about, President Nez?
Yes.
That is the lower reservoir that we talked about in the previous slide that's at the bottom of the mountain.
And the body of water.
Does that answer your question?
Let me just answer things. The body of water then to the west of the Clabato, Chairman, Nez, slightly to the southwest, that is the location of the upper reservoir. And just to help further orient people, I know everybody on this call knows this, but the vertical line on this map, just to the left, just to the west of the Baklabatwo community name, that is the border between New Mexico and Arizona. So this project, we didn't think it would, we wanted to make it really challenging. The upper reservoir and the underground powerhouse are actually located in Arizona. And the lower reservoir is located in New Mexico.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question. I see at the top on the left side where it says Tisnos Ponce, near Tisnos Ponce, it says T&R sections for makeup water pipeline. I see San Juan River from the top here. And then there's that blue dotted line. Is that blue dotted line where the pipeline will go, water pipeline?
The blue dotted line that goes south and then west and south, that is the township and range sections for where the water pipeline will be. We have another map that we'll show you here shortly that is zoomed in on where that pipeline is, and you'll be able to see much more clearly the location of that. Tom, do you have that map anywhere?
Yes, it's up now. Yes, so we're on 22 of 23 on the.
There is There's another map that just shows the there we go.
Okay, well, we can wait till we get to that slide there. I was just curious about the other one, so I see this one better. So we can go back to the other slide now. Thank you.
Chairman Nez,
We can talk about this now.
Yeah, go ahead, Tracy, please. Sorry.
Yeah, we can talk about this map now. I think it answers your question more thoroughly. We tried to stay away from the Baklabatuo Dome. This map north is not straight up, so just be aware of that. If you see the north arrow to the upper left, the pipeline does run approximately south to north. So this is, again, just like the transmission lines. It's a proposed path for minimal impact to new right-of-ways. For the most part, we tried to follow existing roads with the proposal that the pipeline would either be in the road, buried, or in the ditch adjacent to the road. From the far left bottom corner where the lower reservoir is, and where that pipeline comes from the reservoir and runs north, for about 4 or 5 miles, that would be new right-of-way. There are no roads in that area to follow. And then once it gets to near the highway at Baklabatuo, that's the highway that runs west out of Shiprock. From there, it follows principally, for the most part, existing unpaved road right-of-ways. And there is a solid line that shows the primary proposed right-of-way, and a dash line as an alternative right-of-way under an unpaved road. And you see the dark dots on there along the pipeline corridors. That's infrastructure. I believe those are primarily houses people access their houses from those dirt roads from the main highway. If you continue to follow that pipeline to the north, to the upper right-hand corner of the map, that pipeline then goes into an intake facility. It's be a small building with water pumps there above the river and above the floodplain. And those pumps then would be housed in that building there, and they would be electric driven pumps.
Chairman Nez, if I could add one point to this as well. The infrastructure you see here, the pipeline and the pumping infrastructure, it's about $50 million of capital. And I want to remind everybody of a point Tracy brought up earlier. Once the fill of the lower reservoir is achieved, which is 18 to 24 month time period, this whole $50 million infrastructure is only utilized approximately 10% to replace water loss to evaporation at 2,655 acre feet. And so there is the opportunity with the additional 90% of capacity that now exists in this system to supply water from the river up to the Baklabatuo and Tisnas communities. And Tracy, would you briefly just kind of talk about where that offline would come and how that would work?
So this pipeline would be a steel pipe, and it would be under some pressure depending on where on the pipeline you would tap into. The opportunity is to be able to connect anywhere along that pipeline, from anywhere from the river or even at the pump facility at the river, all the way to the lower reservoir, anywhere along that 11-mile length, to tap into that with a auxiliary pipeline, water pipeline, to deliver water anywhere within, with using the existing pressure of the pumping facility, within up to 10 miles approximately from this main trunk line, meaning that the project will have already paid for the pumping facility, which is a significantly large portion of the total $50+ million for this part of the infrastructure already to support the pump storage facility. So it will already been paid for. So you could take advantage of basically already installed pumping facilities and pipeline by tapping into it with a new water line and deliver that water anywhere within 10 miles using the existing pressure in the system for either residential post-treatment residential water use, or for instance, agriculture, or even other industries.
Are there any questions on this topic?
Questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I see where Batlabito is located on the map here, and it's approximately 3 miles east. It looks like Highway 64 is right there. So I have a good visual of where it's going to be located, and thank you.
Mike Halona has a question.
Mr. Halona, go ahead.
Yes, so with all the transmission lines and all the water lines and everything, how many total surface acres are you impacted?
Tracy, did you hear that question?
Why don't you go back to the, yes, why don't you go back to that other map you flashed up before this one, which is a zoom in of both reservoirs.
Okay, go back one.
To answer that question.
This is page 20.
So let me take a step backwards. When we filed our application with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for this project, one of the requirements is for a boundary of the quote unquote impacted area. So we drew a boundary around the 2 reservoirs, the substation, the access tunnels, everything that is above ground structures, with the exception of the transmission line that runs from near the lower reservoir over to the Four Corners and San Juan coal plant substations. So this boundary is the dashed black line that you can see around the upper reservoir. It takes some diagonals and it comes back down. It passes above the portal for the access tunnel for construction workers and operations and maintenance access. That's slightly to the right of middle and slightly to the north of middle, called Access Portal 1. There's a parking lot there and a tunnel you drive into. And there's the substation is right there. Then it takes a diagonal to the southeast and a little more east and goes around the lower reservoir, and then comes back to the south and goes west back to the upper reservoir. That boundary, if you will, has very little infrastructure contained within that boundary. But to give you an idea, that boundary is a little over 10,000 acres. But by no means is that the areas of acreage of impact. For instance, the substation at the access portal is only a few acres for a parking lot. The substation will be a typical mid-sized substation you'd see in a small city. So it's probably approximately 200 by 200 feet or less in size. And some roads. And we're going to use existing roads for the most part. There are a few new roads. Those would be primarily intended to be gravel roads, not paved roads. Does that answer your questions?
So how many total acres did you say?
I didn't hear that.
How many total acres?
The total acres, a little over 10,000 for the boundary.
Okay, how about all the water lines and all your transmission lines?
So the water line will have a right of way of approximately 20 feet wide, over 11 miles. And for the most part, for more than 50%, that water line will be contained in existing right of ways. So technically would not have an impact after it's operational, after construction. So that leaves you about, these are all approximate numbers. That leaves you about 5 miles of right of way times that width for the acreage. I don't have the math in front of me. So that might be 20 or 30 acres, maybe a little more. For the tunnels are under the mountain, so they don't have any above ground impact. And there are no requirements for roads that follow the tunnel above the ground, above the tunnels. Sorry, on the ground above the tunnels. The only roads that we would have would be roads to the upper reservoir and to the lower reservoir, and a road to what's called the Powerhouse Overflow structure. That's approximately halfway between the two reservoirs. You'll see the title in the upper part of that map, Powerhouse B Overflow structure. That's currently designed as a large bathtub circular structure, approximately 50 to 100 feet in diameter, approximately 20 feet tall. And there would be a road from the upper reservoir, a dirt road, gravel road from the upper reservoir to that overflow structure. So the right of way of that road would be a standard county approved width of road times the length of the road, new road needed. That might be a few dozen to maybe 100 acres for new road.
Transmission lines, Tracy?
Transmission lines will be, the right of way on the transmission line will be approximately 200 to 250 feet wide for each transmission line, with a dirt access road under the transmission line for maintenance. So that acreage would be approximately that width times the distance from this substation on the map to the San Juan substation, and that's approximately 30 miles. And the right of way also for the south transmission line from the substation at access portal 1, same width, 250 feet, times approximately that 30 miles. So we have those acreages in the application we filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is a public document that we're willing to share, of course, with everyone that would be interested. And in that document, it describes in detail, down to the 10th of a mile, these distances and right-of-way widths and the amount of acreage used and who owns that acreage. And 99+% of all acreage is on tribal trust lands. A very tiny amount is on state and BLM land over by the substations. And when I say a tiny amount, less than, I believe, a couple of 100 acres, maybe far less than that, or I recall. Back to you. Any questions on that?
So the boundary, is that required to be fenced?
That's a good question. No, it is not required to be fenced. And
The
the lower
substa-
and upper reservoir are not required by federal regulation to be fenced either.
Substation would be fenced, of course.
The substation will be fenced, and there'll probably be a security gate at the access portal for just to protect unauthorized entry. The parking lot will, it's inconclusive if the parking lot at the portal will require a gate or the gate will just be into the portal, but certainly the substation will have a fence.
Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions? I hear none. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Nez.
Thank you. One other comment on the border and the boundary. It's really an artificial construct for the purposes of the license application. It's not intended to restrict any other use of any other activity within those boundaries as contemplated today or in the future.
Tracy, before we leave this topic, I have one final question. You said that boundary around both reservoirs was 10,000 acres. On this slide, we captured it at 1,000. Is the slide wrong or is the 10,000 wrong?
I don't see that on the slide offhand. Yeah, so no, that is less than 1,000 acres of everything we mentioned.
So it's
the reservoir acreages. No, these are just what are facilities that are on the ground, like the parking lot at the portal of the tunnel, the surface area of the reservoirs, the surface area of the dams. The acreage is consumed by roads. In other words, changes to the landscape for less than 1,000 acres.
Right. Okay, thanks.
It's transmission lines.
Yeah. Okay. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay. Now we want to go through some high level.
Chairman Nez, this is Delegate Crotty. May I ask a question?
Thank you very much, Chair Crotty. For getting on the call. I was just getting ready to text you because this is in your area, Clabato. And yes, you're more than welcome to ask a question. Mr. Tahi, also Honorable Otto So is on the call, just for your information. And Ms. Crotty, go ahead.
Thank you, yes, Chairman Nez and Resource and Development Committee members and Vice Chair. So thank you for being on the call. I just, in joining the call, thank you for the invitation. I don't recognize the voice that's asking for clarification regarding the presentation, Chairman Nez. I connected through Zoom, so it's on the Resource and Development Committee. Can I just get that individual recognized so I can understand who's asking clarification questions on behalf of the community? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Crotty. First, I was asking most of the questions, and then we do have Land Department, Mr. Mike Halona, that was asking the question just a while ago. So he was asking about the rights of ways and the land, the acreage and all that. So for your information, Honorable Crotty.
Thank you. I just noted that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Halona, for asking those questions. I'll continue to listen and appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Chair Crotty, could you please introduce yourself? Let us know which chapters you represent, please.
Oh, absolutely. Sheikh Kia Ani Nesle do Bilagana Bashushin, Deschini Deshache do Bilagana de Chanele, Shay Amber, Canis Bakrati Yanishit, Tolhatsoi Mayatnat Shah. On the council, I represent Sheep Springs, Two Gray Hills, Tolina, Sanofi, Red Valley, Cove, Gadiai, and Biklabato. I sit on the Budget and Finance Committee, and I chair the Sexual Assault Prevention Subcommittee, and we represent all of our beautiful Navajo people. So thank you, committee members, for having this leadership meeting on the proposed plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Crotty. Honorable Otto So, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning.
Otto
You guys
So?
hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman, and then members of the Resource and Development Committee, and those of you on the line, and my fellow colleagues of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Also, in the share, now Cardinato, he's leaning, just on El Kappa, Ambassador no, 20 nests, they are shadow, the Eva Bejman, and in Schlem. Kodoi, to the presenter, I am the councilman from Tuba City, community of Tuba City. So thank you for this introduction, Chairman and members of the Resource Development Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Crotty and Honorable So, you're more than welcome to ask questions during the presentation as well. Back to you, Kinetic Power.
Honorable Crotty and Mr. So, thank you for joining us. Honorable Crotty, this is Tom Conroy, and also then my partner on the phone is on the phone, Tracy Livingston, and we're glad to be speaking with you again. Thank you for joining us. We'll move now to the slide 8 of 23. It's pulled up on the video, and just wanted to walk through some of the economic opportunities here related specifically to the project, and then some of the off throw that could happen. This is a $3.6 billion estimated capital project. It is quite unique in the world of renewable energy, meaning wind and solar and project or batteries, because the local spending to do all this construction we've been talking about is about half of that total capital, or about $1.8 billion. This is not a matter of trucking in wind turbines or trucking in solar modules and trackers or trucking in battery systems and installing them onto a site. Obviously, this is a very different scenario as a large construction project. Keep in mind as well, these pump storage hydro projects with periodic refurbishments effectively are expected to last forever. The first pump storage hydro project built in the United States was built 91 years ago in Connecticut and is still running today and has I think a 35 or 37 megawatt nameplate. So we believe that these should be conceived as 100-year or longer projects. Under a 5-year construction scenario, there will be about 675 direct workers at the site. And then if you include the indirect and the other related jobs to support those 605 direct workers, you get to a total of about 2,200 construction jobs for 5 years. And again, just to reiterate, digging 24 miles of tunnels, excavating a very large underground powerhouse like you saw the picture of, building these dams, which are hundreds of feet high, it is a very large construction project and takes a lot of labor for a number of years. Once this project goes into operation, the estimates are there would be 50 direct jobs. And as everybody here knows, power plants tend to spin off a lot of related jobs. They subcontract a lot of work that doesn't take full-time workers. And so the total job impact for 100 years or more is expected to be 335 people. Now, related to this project, there is the opportunity, should the nation or the region want to do so, to build very large amounts of associated solar power plants. There could be as much as $2 to $4 billion worth of solar power plants built in the region if that was desired. Now, if we did build 2,000 megawatts of solar, which is one scenario that supports PNM directly in a system their size, that would add another 641 construction workers for 5 years, and total jobs created would be 2,000 related with that work. And then the ongoing solar jobs created would be about 73 direct and 500. And again, once you build a solar power plant, our expectation is that that facility gets upgraded approximately every 20 years with new technology. What's happening is that actually solar modules are gaining in conversion efficiency from sunlight into electricity about 5% a year. And so what that means is every 20 years or so, if you replace the solar modules and refurbish the plant, you actually can double the output out of that footprint every 20 years. And for those of you who are following really wind and solar projects around the country, land use is a very contentious issue. And so being able to double the output every 20 years is a very big deal. You could actually set up the solar, and I'm going into the solar in a little bit of depth because I know solar has the reputation of generating very few jobs after construction, which, if you're talking about 100 megawatt or $100 million solar project, that's true. I wouldn't disagree. You could build a scenario here, though, where you have $2 billion or more of solar. It's a very large construction project for 5 or 6 years. And then actually you can set it up so you're doing these rolling refurbishments, and you could actually create ongoing construction jobs for 100 years doing those refurbishments. That would be continuous jobs. It's an opportunity. As we talked about, this location for the pump storage hydro is uniquely advantaged because of the topography of the Carrizo Mountains here. Solar, New Mexico and Arizona both have great solar resources. So if the nation did not want solar on the nation, then that could be built elsewhere. It would be beneficial to build it near the project, but it doesn't have to be. We talked about the water already. Something we're going to go into in the next agenda topic is partial or full ownership options for the Navajo Nation. We'll go into this in some detail, so I'll just table that, but it is absolutely an opportunity should the nation want to have ownership, either partial, fill, or full for this project. There are, of course, tax revenues that would flow to San Juan and Apache counties for schools and other county purposes. There are expected to be financial considerations to the nation and local communities. There would unquestionably, in my mind, be curriculum created at DNA, at Navajo Technical University and San Juan College to create this, to do the upskilling of local individuals that are going to be engaged in this dam building and tunnel construction and ongoing operations of this project. This project, again, being unique in terms of really the 70 hours of duration and the incredibly efficient and low level of water usage, would garner a great deal of worldwide attention onto the Navajo Nation. We didn't talk about this earlier, but Kinetic Power, Tracy and I, really led by Tracy, have created some new technology tunneling methods that the Department of Energy Water Power Technologies Office ran a contest with the objective of trying to reduce the construction times for these projects. And Tracy in particular created a number of technologies and processes that got us to first place actually with that award. And the Department of Energy, I think, would love nothing more than to work further together with us and with the Navajo Nation to implement and develop those tunneling technologies. The final comment, the Navajo Nation, first off, for this project, this pump storage hydro project really delivers what is called seasonal duration storage. I keep coming back to this point, the 70 hours. To give you a reference, the battery systems that utilities are installing today or trying to, and this includes APS and SRP and PNM in California, these are essentially all 4-hour duration. And they are completely acknowledged to be insufficient to get to high levels of decarbonization. And this seasonal duration storage is considered one of the key technologies required to do so. It is a wide open market. There is tremendous demand across all the utilities in the Southwest, starting with California, with Arizona, with Colorado, with Utah, with Nevada. They will be highly interested, all these utilities, in facilities with this kind of duration metric and operational efficiencies. And the reason I bring that all up is not only because the Carrizo project is highly advantaged in that way, but the Navajo Nation, Tracy and I have done investigations of other locations on the nation, and there are other favorable locations for certain. Not quite as favorable as this Carrizo project, but not very far behind. And so should the nation decide that this is a technology they'd like to pursue because of any number of reasons, there are other locations on the nation with favorable topographies as well. Chairman Nez, could I ask if there's any questions before we move on?
Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions? Or Honorable Crotty, Honorable So, you're more than welcome to ask any questions also.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions. I do also see Shabeja with Department of Water had her hand raised. But before we move on to them, I did want to see in terms of, so this has been presented to the communities, and feedback I've received is concern with the impact or disruption to a community that's used to not having development in their communities and how that will impact. And so I'm trying to see in terms of when we talk about the economic benefits, it's economic benefits like to the nation through taxes or through the county through taxes. At what stage do we talk about how we can support the concerns of the impacted communities that are going to then, like, their lives are going to change now with this development, and at this point they're not convinced on the benefits of this program and how that will impact their livelihood. So we're at that point, and then I wanted to hear, because it's a very technical program, so I'm just listening, and I'm continuing to engage and making sure that I could answer questions. So I don't know at what point of the presentation that will be discussed, Chairman Nez and committee members, but that definitely is important. And I'll defer back to the committee and Shabeja, Ms. Tuli Cordova, who with water department. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Your response?
Yes. Thank you, Honorable Crotty. As you know, we have been to the Overflow chapter and presented to the chapter leadership there. And certainly there will be development impacts. The first thing I'd like to say is we are certainly willing to return at any time and talk about what those impacts might look like, both physical and economic, to the best of our ability. And then a second thing I would say that, in fact, there are a tremendous amount of interest. There's the interest in the Department of Energy and the National Labs and the Water Power Technology Office in trying to get some seasonal duration pump storage hydro projects off the ground is high. And I bring that up because there are a tremendous amount of local community support grants that are actually targeted at having experts from the national labs or other places come in and do very detailed studies to answer the question you're posing. So I give those two answers. We are willing to come and speak at any time and talk about concerns. And also there are available third parties who also would do independent studies for you in the community.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Doctor, go ahead.
I was just saying, I appreciate that. So let's keep engaging the community and understanding their concerns. And I know they were asking for maps and wanted to know specifically what areas would be impacted. So it does look like more development or a refinement in the area. So yes, let me know how we could continue to collaborate that. And I want to thank Mr. Trujillo for coordinating with the chapter. I did let them know that this leadership meeting is happening and welcome them to join the call, or we'll provide them a recording of the meeting and just make sure that everyone is engaged. One of the areas that was on my to-do list, and as we're receiving this presentation, could you, and at one time we talked about the impact on Cove residents, is so at this point we've targeted, the Clabato has been identified, Tees Naspas community, and could you let me know from your mapping, or if Mr. Halona can let me know how this impacts Cove chapter? Thank you very much.
I will take an action item to send you a map which has this same project overview you've seen in these maps, but it's overlaid over all the chapters, so you'll know very specifically how each chapter is impacted. And the second thing I would say, yes, we have been, as you know, to the Clabato, we have been to Tees Naspas in person and actually received a support resolution from them. Tomorrow, we're going to Red Valley. Any and all other chapters that you or any of the honorable members represent that are on this call, we would love to go visit in person, introduce ourselves, explain the project and answer any concerns or questions to the best of our ability.
Thank you for your response. Let me go to Dr. Tully Cordova.
Thank you, Chair and honorable members of the RDC, and for the opportunity to ask questions. Following up on Delegate Crotty's point, I think it, for our office as well as other entities, I know like Land Department, Mr. Mike Colonna is there in person, but in looking at the exhibits that are a part of your presentation, I think it would be beneficial to have chapter boundaries overlaid on those maps that are presented to Navajo communities as well as departments, because that allows us to better create orientation to the map. So I just offer that suggestion. And so my question is, thank you for providing the information as far as the acre feet per year that is needed for the project. But one thing that I may have missed and that you described is the initial fill for the project. So it's my understanding that on an annual basis, the amount needed for the project, largely due to evaporation losses, is 2,655 acre feet per year. But I'm just curious about what the initial fill for both the upper and the lower reservoir would be to start the project. Thank you.
Your response?
Tracy, are you still there?
I am still here. Thanks for that question. Yeah, we did not touch on the size of the initial fill. So the initial fill, so what we will do is we will use the pump facilities through the pipeline, and we will initially fill the lower lake. We won't be filling the upper lake, but we just need to have one lake filled. And that takes approximately 18 months to 2 years. And that's a little over 36,000 acre feet, I believe. Is that right, Tom? I don't have the number in front of me.
Yes.
Okay, slightly over 36,000 acre feet. That fill may or may not be a continuous pump from the river, just depends on stream flow requirements for environmental protection of protected species and for requirements out of Navajo Lake for maintaining a proper stream flow, also for protection of species. Does that answer your question?
Dr. Tully Cordova.
Thank you, Chair. Can you describe, so thank you for describing that initial fill. Can you describe using the estimated timeline that you described, how much per year would be needed for that initial? So like within the first year and then within the second year, breaking up on that incremental level? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, good question. It's approximately linear. So the first year would be half that. If it took 2 years to fill, then the first year would be half that. So 18,000 acre feet. And then the following year would be another 18,000 acre feet. It may vary on a flow rate basis by season. So the pumping facilities, at least as currently anticipated, are engineered and sized for 24/7 delivery of water through that pipeline on a consistent volume basis for those 2 years. But until we have feedback from the San Juan Commission for stream flow and coordination with Federal Fish and Wildlife, as well as coordination with the tribe, we don't know within a seasonality whether certain high flow seasons will have higher pumping requirements to minimize impacts, for instance, in June than in August. August certainly would be a much lower, most likely flow rate than in the high water months.
Thank you.
Questions on that?
Let's move on to the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, one quick thing here. Everybody, if the people that are on the screen should be able to see the project overlay over a chapters map. Can people see that? And Honorable Crotty, I think you were asking about Cove chapter, and I do not believe that the project touches Cove chapter anywhere. That's it. And Chairman Nez, if I could just ask if I know this topic here on this map came up a number of times, so if there's any questions we could address, we'll certainly.
No, just go ahead and go through the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Oh, no, that's the other presentation. Okay. And can we go to the prior slide? Briefly. I just will briefly show what, for all of you, I believe, have received this presentation, and this is what the jobs analysis looks like, broken down between direct and indirect and induced jobs. Just one thing I'd point out on the pump storage hydro project, about every 25 to 30 years, it will undergo a major refurbishment, and that in today's dollars would be about $700 million. So every 25 to 30 years is a repeat of a large construction and refurbishment activities. And that's what the bumps you see in the employment are there at years 30 and 60 and 90. Could you please go forward 2 slides then? Okay. We have been, now we're going to move on to slide 11. We have been, I think, let's see, asked a number of times. There were some pump storage hydro projects proposed over in the Little Colorado River that today has morphed into the Big Canyon project. And they have generated enormous opposition from the Navajo Nation, from the Hopis, from all sorts of river and environmental groups as well. And I just wanted to take 1 or 2 minutes here and explain what the differences are with this project to those projects, because they are sort of night and day. As we talked earlier, this is what's called a closed loop project, which means there is no flowing waterway that is dammed up in our project. In comparison, these projects over to the west near Lake Powell, all of them are proposing to dam up existing waterways, and some of them magnificent and valuable and valued canyons. I keep talking about this duration metric. This project has 70 hours. Their projects have about 11.5 hours of duration. We've talked about this point several times. Our head height being very high makes this a very water efficient project. The projects over in the west have about half the head height, which means to store an equivalent unit of energy takes twice the water as the Carrizo project. In our meetings to date with the local Navajo communities, we have felt that we've received a high level of interest and a great deal of support, quite frankly. We were concerned there wouldn't be, but there's great interest and there seems to be wide support. And that's not meaning to undermine Honorable Crotty's comment that there are certainly concerns, and I'm sure we expect there to be, and we want to work with them. On the other side, the project over there in the west are highly opposed by everybody across the board. And then the final thing I would just note is that we here are local. Again, as I said, I first came to New Mexico over 40 years ago. Between Tracy and I, we've got over 5 decades of experience, and the genesis of this project was really trying to drive local economic development opportunities. I'm going to shift gears now and talk about the project financial structure of a pump storage hydro endeavor such as this. And the reason to do this is, number one, we are completely open on what we're trying to do with the nation. And it also gets to this decision related to an opportunity that the nation has for the nation to make a decision whether or not they would care to have partial or even total ownership of this project. These numbers that you're seeing, so as I've talked about, this is a $3.6 billion project. We believe that something called the Federal Investment Tax Credit, which today applies to solar, and it pays for 30% of the solar project capital, will over the next 4 to 5 years be extended to these projects. If it is, that means that the federal government would pay about a little over $1 billion of the project capital, leaving about $2.5 billion to be financed directly by the project. And those structures, under an 80% of capital is provided by debt and 20% is equity. That means that the debt portion of this project would be about $2 billion and the equity portion about $500 million. Now, the timing of those cash funds being invested are as follows. There will be a 3 to 4 year study period covering environmental and cultural, historic, water, obviously for sure, engineering, transmission, on and on. And between these studies and transmission interconnect deposits, we believe the requirements will be somewhere 20 to 50 million during this 1 to 4 year time frame. In assuming that construction begins at year 4 to 5 is when the spending really happens. That's when this $3.6 billion spread between debt and equity needs to be raised and committed. It's when this real spending begins on all these construction activities that would occur locally. The remaining 50% goes to items like the equipment, a lot of engineering, insurance, there's construction financing, etc. So that's the total capital, and that's a very high level picture of what the timing of the capital coming in needs to be. And Chairman Nez, I will pause here and ask if there are any questions on what we've covered on this slide.
Thank you. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions? I hear none. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Go forward. Okay. Now, the next area of interest is if people invest all this money, this $3.6 billion, what does it look like to get repaid? And under one scenario, which is a scenario essentially where this project would support a utility like PNM in reaching 100% decarbonization levels. The revenue per year is about $170 million. If the debt were paid off in 20 years, the debt payment would be about $161 million a year. And then what happens, by the way, then is at year 21, this project would be owned by the equity holders free and clear, 100%. And so all return generated from years 21 through 100 would flow to the equity holders. The operating expenses per year are estimated at 20 million. And here there's about an 11 million pre-tax loss shown. And the reason that this can operate at a loss is that there are also substantial depreciation benefits to a project such as this, as well as wind and solar. They are subject to accelerated depreciation. If they're owned by somebody besides the utility, utilities are not able to actually take advantage of this. But this entire project, this $3.6 billion project, could be fully depreciated in 6 years. It's a tremendous benefit for these power projects. And so that delivers about 19 million a year when those benefits are taken into account in positive cash and positive P&L profit. And then you look at this average after-tax cash flow. Under this scenario, it's about 8 million a year for the first 20 years. But then from year 21 and on, it jumps to 66 million because, as I said, this project is paid off at that time. This is just one of almost an infinite number of financing and operational scenarios that exist, but it is probably one of the principal applications of this facility in supporting utilities like PNM and other surrounding utilities in essentially a load following mode, seasonal duration. I'll pause here, Chairman Nez. Are there any questions on this slide?
Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions?
Chairman Nez, I got a question.
Honorable Otto, go ahead.
Yes, and I'm on the phone. I don't have the map or anything of that nature. But what I'm getting to is that so if this is a hydro plant, and it looks like the way you're describing it, it's a piped in and piped out facility, and on the diameter of the berm that's going to be built for the two reservoirs, what is the projected length and the projected width from the across the length, and then also the base width and the top width, and I'm just trying to figure out the size of this. Thank you very much.
Honorable Mr. Tahi, our advisor, will send you the PowerPoint presentation And he did tell me he sent it to you, so you should receive the PowerPoint presentation. But kinetics, your response?
Tracy,
I can
would you
probably
please-
answer that question. Yeah, I can probably answer that question. So as far as if we have to make an assumption that the upper and lower dams are going to be earthen embankment dams at this point until further engineering. They could be concrete, but right now let's just assume they're earthen dams. And as an earthen dam, the upper reservoir, probably best to compare it to Navajo Lake's earthen dam. That earthen dam is approximately, I believe, 7 or 8 million cubic yards of material. And the upper earthen dam would be approximately a million and a half cubic yards of material. So it's substantially smaller than the Navajo embankment dam. The width, and again, all of these figures are contained in finite detail in our license application that we can share with everyone, and it's a public document. The width, the length of that upper dam is approximately a little over 1,000 feet. Across the top would be like you'd think of as a conventional earthen dam. It'll be approximately 20 feet to 25 feet wide at the top for probably a small road across it. The base, I don't remember exactly, but because it is a very tall dam at over 400 feet, and that slope is generally for an earthen dam on the front side that you see is generally 2 to 1. You can sort of figure that puts it at a base of over 1,000 feet, substantially over 1,000 feet thickness at the base. The lower dam is substantially smaller than that, both in height and, well, the width is similar, but the height is much smaller, closer to 200 to 250 feet. And therefore its width is, at the base of it, is substantially smaller, but it's the same slope, approximately 2 to 1 on the front face, like you'd see at Navajo Dam. Does that answer your question?
Honorable So?
Yes.
Follow-up question?
Yes. Thank you very much. And I have a vision of it now, since you talked about the slope, 2 to 1 slope, and with the top berm and the lower berm, and you're building a big project there. So although I was trying to figure out what the size of that project is going to be. So other than that, I am good right now, and thank you very much. Yeah, I'm on mute.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Honorable, so we appreciate all questions, and I say that with total seriousness. We'll move on then to the next slide. And again, the reason I bring this level of detail up is really to just disclose what this project looks like and let the nation know that, in fact, we are not only willing and able to talk about ownership options, but we have some significant understanding of how the economics of these projects work. And this is charted really the same information, the same scenario as the prior slide. You can see the revenue line on this chart flat at $160 million for 100 years. There are not any inflation assumptions built into this model because it just makes it too hard, at least for me, to understand. The orange line that you see on this chart is actually the cash flow by year. And you can see up front, especially in the first 20 years, it looks crazy. put this project into operation, all of a sudden you've got $325 million of positive cash flow in the first 6 years. Then you go negative for about 10 years before you pop up positive again. And the reason for this kind of cash flow is, again, it's due to these benefits, the 30% investment tax credit of project capital, number one. And then number two, the taking advantage of the depreciation of this huge capital project over 6 years. And our policy here in the US has actually been specifically designed to do this in order to encourage investment in these renewable projects. And so, and more expert finance guys than me, will give us plans to say, okay, there are ways to smooth out those cash flows. And just one example, as I said, this scenario assumes paying off the debt, the 80% of the debt in 20 years. It's entirely possible to get 40 or even 60-year debt repayment schedules, which would change this cash flow. On that orange line, I want to point out one other thing. You can see the box at the right, the cash flow drops every 25 years as those major refurbishment activities occur. And then you have that bump in cash flow because those, again, are subject to this accelerated depreciation. And so that's why you have that perturbation of the cash flow happening even in years 21 through 100. Given all that, probably the green line is the most important, which is actually for the project, the cumulative, and the green line is the cumulative, meaning the additive after-tax cash flow for 100 years. And you can see in this type of scenario, it kind of balances out over the first 20 years. That's consistent with the prior slide of the 8 million a year profit. But then after that, after the debt is paid off, it's just a straight profit generating machine. And over time, over this 100 years, under this particular scenario, this project would generate about $6 billion of cash flow to the equity holders. I would like to ask, I think this might, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, are there any questions on this chart?
Thank you for that. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any questions or comments? Or colleagues? I hear none. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Could you please move on to the next slide? Okay. As we mentioned during our introductions, Tracy and I have secured tens of millions of dollars of financing for some of the various projects we've worked on together, both wind projects and that tower innovation project, et cetera. And so it's always important to understand this, both with the upfront $20 to $50 million of capital that's needed, and then the big chunk of capital that's needed in 3 to 5 years, where will we get that money? The federal government today has tremendous funds available to support projects like this, as well as the communities that are going to be impacted by a project like this. And right now, for example, we could not be better positioned if the nation were were wanting to do so. There's $10 million specifically allocated to pump storage hydro on tribal lands that's greater than 1,000 megawatts nameplate, that accesses more than one market, electricity market, and this project meets every one of those criteria. It's custom made to get some of those $10 million. The second option, one I like, all of you are fully aware of the intense both political and financial pressure on all of the oil companies around the world to try and transition their businesses into cleaner footprints. And so many of these companies over in Europe, they've gone so far, Shell has gone so far to lay off 80% of their geologists, for example. And these companies are looking for projects and a way to participate in these new no carbon scenarios. And this project would be just right up their wheelhouse. They are used to doing very large multi-year construction projects where there are risks associated with them, where there's a lot of capital to be raised, where it's a big construction project. And this project could very well meet the kind of return expectations that they're looking for. There are a variety of European investors. There's a company called Copenhagen Infrastructure Projects that have already invested in a majority ownership fashion in 2 pump storage hydro projects in the Western US. And Avangrid, which is a name that should be familiar to everybody from their past and ongoing attempts to acquire public service in New Mexico. They are deeply familiar with pump storage hydro, and in fact just spent some number of $1 billion upgrading a PSH project in Europe. We've actually had conversations with Bill Gates's energy private equity firm through kind of an agent they have. The same is true of BP through an agent. We have not gone out at this point to directly present the opportunity to any of these entities, but there's a great deal of private equity funds that are looking to drive projects like this. The uniqueness of this project at 70 hours and the water efficiency will be of incredibly intense interest to them. And then finally, of course, our utilities are historically the entities which made these large long-term investments. Nuclear plants, coal plants, natural gas plants, hydro plants, et cetera. They are typically, and I would almost say unfortunately, prohibited or discouraged from owning projects like this in a variety of ways by public utility commissions, and et cetera. There could, however, be strong arguments as to why, from a public good standpoint, as to why a utility should have partial ownership of these projects, just as they have in the past. So they, although are probably, because of pressures, unlikely owners, they shouldn't be written off as completely not able to be owners. And of course, NTUA is on this list as well. I don't think they're quite subject to the constraints that some of the public utilities like PNM and APS are. And so the idea would be that if we can reach, and we'll talk about specific steps in another slide or two, but if we can reach specific go forward steps with the Navajo Nation, we would go out and present much the same information you have seen today to these entities and look for them to invest initially in that $20 to $50 million needed in the first 1 to 4 years, and presumably be queued up to be a major investor going into the full $3.6 billion project expenditure level. Chairman, as I'll pause here if there are any questions.
Thank you. Honorable members of RDC, as well as my colleagues, do you have any comments or questions on the slide? I hear none. You may proceed.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end for so could you move this forward, please? Okay, yeah, just a couple more slides here. We wanted to just relay to the committee the interactions and the discussions that we've had to date. And so that's what's on this list. For those of you who don't have the list in front of you, I'll just quickly go through it. We have spoken with the president, vice president's office multiple times. And then with them and independently, we've also had discussions and made a similar presentation to this one to the Washington office, to the EPA, the Department of Justice, the Department of Justice Water Rights Unit, to DNR and the Department of Water Resources. Dr. Tully Cordova, of course, has heard some of this before, as has the Honorable Mike Colonna from the Land Department. We have been out to visit in person, Tisnas Pas, stay in close contact with them. They actually published a support resolution for us, coming out quite strongly in support and looking forward to the opportunities that we've talked about here that a project like this could deliver. We did meet as well with the Untitled Chapter, and tomorrow morning we will be visiting in person the Red Valley chapter. The FERC application process, the permitting of all of these pump storage hydro projects across the United States is managed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, FERC. And when we first submitted an application, which Rodney, I will send to you to send to the entire committee, make sure everybody has it. But then there are basically a number of entities of interest that go and express, I forget the right word, participation in the FERC licensing process. And so we immediately reached out to every one of these federal agencies, and they include Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Bureau of Reclamation, the FERC themselves. And then in addition, we've spoken with BLM of Farmington, of New Mexico, and of Arizona. We have spoken with the Grand Canyon Trust. Of course, San Juan County is well aware of what we're proposing here. And Four Corners Economic Development has been tremendously supportive of us throughout. The final group of audiences that we've spoken with are potential customers, which include, we have talked to PNM, and PDAT City is here, of course, from PNM. We have spoken with Arizona Public Service, with Tucson Electric Power, with Salt River Project. And in fact, also we've had one discussion with the energy managers for the Facebook project located south of Albuquerque, as you all know. And so these are the audiences that we have spoken with, are aware of the project, and we wanted to make sure the committee knew that of this list. Moving on to the final slide, really talking about what are we asking for from the Resources and Development Committee. In order to begin to move this project forward from the discussions that have occurred to date, what we need to do is negotiate what we call a cooperation agreement, which would cover the land use, various payments, and any taxes, any employment requirements of the nation, things like that have been very successfully done at places like Four Corners, of what percentage of the employees should be Navajo employees, that sort of thing. One thing I will say, this project is fairly deep into the Navajo Nation, and I think just naturally it's going to be a high percentage of Navajo employees. One suggestion we have is that there have been land use agreements between energy producers on the Navajo Nation for over 50 years, being the coal plants. And of course, we were advised by the Honorable Leonard Sosi that some of those have been objectionable to the nation. But one thing we thought could happen is those contracts could be brought out. At least it gives us a template. The Navajo Nation could look at them, decide, well, this part of it worked for us, this other part did not. We want to change this other part as such and such, etc. And we are, of course, are more than willing and happy and able to work with the nation to try and figure out what sort of contract is beneficial and works for the nation. And this would have the benefit, I think, of being able to be used as templates for other projects that I know are opportunities on the nation. So that's the principal thing we'd like to see, if we could get action and get a committee appointed that was empowered to work through those issues. The second ask we have is that the Navajo Nation evaluate any interest in project ownership. And this could be anywhere from 1% to 100%. I want to reiterate and just make completely clear, Kinetic Power is not asking the Navajo Nation for any money whatsoever. We are convinced that this project can be funded with outside capital, and Tracy and I have the experience and the track record to be able to raise that capital. But it's a very big opportunity, and we think that Navajo ownership is possible and beneficial and should be considered. And then the final point, it came up today from Honorable Crotty and others, that we do intend to continue to engage with the local chapters, and there are some chapters we need to get to. In particular, after we talk with Red Valley tomorrow, we would like to work with the chapters. What's really left is the transmission lines. And we would like to work together with the chapters to be able to route those transmission lines in a way that makes the absolute least impact to those communities, so that they don't oppose them. And then the intention, of course, is if we can get, in particular, this first item moving forward, this cooperation agreement, we do want to, as part of that, set up ongoing communication processes and make them formal, so that there are no surprises going forward. So, Honorable Nez, those are the items that are needed to move the project forward, and that we would request the committee's help to accomplish.
Thank you for that. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any questions or comments on the slide there? None, you may proceed.
Very good. There's just then a final summary slide. It talks about the project and the operation. One thing we haven't covered, I would like to cover, that was of high interest to the local chapters. Keep in mind that this project, it's an energy storage project. And in operation, this project will generate 0 emissions. It works by electricity in. The input energy is electricity, which is generated elsewhere, presumably by wind and solar. And the output is electricity that goes to the grid. And the local communities absolutely were appreciative that they could have a project of this size and this economic impact, and it would have 0 pollution coming from it. And I think if we buy the Cruise electric pickup trucks, which by the time we hit operation should be possible, that there will be no emissions whatsoever. There is this opportunity to build with this project. It really supports very large build out of solar regionally. And if the nation is interested in that, it's an additional opportunity. And it's distinct from some of the solar projects that are coming up today that are relatively small. This project could support very large solar projects that deliver meaningful jobs, meaningful economic advantages. And another thing the chapters appreciated actually is when you build those solar power plants, it is number one, entirely possible and desirable, in fact, to continue sheep ranching underneath those solar panels, and it's beneficial to the project for vegetation management. And the second thing going on is that there is tremendous interest around the world going on about something called agrovoltaics. And this is basically the application of technologies to these solar power plants that really promote and support efficient agricultural use under these solar panels on these solar power plants. We talked about the water benefits to local communities. Also, there is obviously a very large electrical infrastructure associated with this project that the local communities were interested in benefiting from. And with that, I will conclude, Chairman Nez. I will ask if there are any final questions or comments or suggestions for Kinetic Power as to what we should be seeking to do as far as next steps.
Thank you very much for the presentation on this project at Batlabato, the Hydroelectric Energy Storage Center being proposed. It will need a lot of community input, engagement with the local chapter there at Batlabato, as well as Cuddy Eye. So perhaps Tisnos Ponce too, and Shiprock all the way this way along the river, since the transmission lines will be going this way to Four Corners Power Plant and P&M, which will include also San Juan chapter, Ninanza chapter, Hogback chapter, just to inform them of this project moving forward. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions? Or my colleagues, do you have any questions, comments? None?
Chairman Nez, this is Tom Taylor.
Go ahead.
One of the things that's important at this point is that there are so many questions that need to be answered that we can't answer about right-of-ways and all of these studies that go on, engineering, right-of-ways, environmental, cultural, all of that stuff. The details of that can't be answered until there's been studies done of that. And you can't do studies of that without money to do them. And that's why it's important that we come up with an agreement to move forward with the project. And we have to get that in place so that then we can go out and raise those dollars necessary to answer all those questions over the next 4 years, basically 3 or 4 years, in establishing exactly what's going to happen in those areas. And all of that will be very much a public process where those studies will result in answering a lot of the questions and defining exactly what things are going to look like in an area. So it's kind of an awkward situation because, without an agreement to move forward, there's no money to be put into it, so you can't answer the questions. And so I think it's important that the committee have an opportunity to digest this presentation, discuss it, and decide if you want to move forward with the project. And if so, then I don't know who it is that needs to do that. I guess it's the Justice Department probably that would have the lead in creating that. That's really what needs to happen at this point, is we need to be able to move to the next step, and we can't fund it until there's a clear roadmap to be able to do those projects and raise the money to do them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Yeah, you're very right about the rights of ways, the cultural, archaeological, biological clearances before all this moves forward. The committee, the leadership itself has to have a full understanding of this project. And based on the information and the PowerPoint provided today, we just really do need to digest it to be well informed, and also for the community of the Clabato to be fully informed. Their leadership there, the local chapter officials, the grazing official, the farm board, as well as community members, the permittees that will be signing off on the land that they will relinquish for the rights of ways for this project. There's so much to think about. And as you said, until you have an agreement, you're going to go out and seek investors to invest in this. And thank you for divulging the investors that are interested in this. And it appears that it will create jobs for the Navajo Nation as well as revenue. But I believe a project of this magnitude would require a sit down at a large area like Twin Arrows Navajo Casino Resort, to where we can all sit 6 feet apart and have this presentation presented to leadership from the Resources and Development Committee, as well as Honorable Amber Kennesbaugh-Crotty, who is the delegate that represents Clabato, the chapter officials of Clabato, as well as the Navajo Nation Council, who would be interested in learning and hearing about this hydroelectric energy project and how all this works. So I think it might be a jolt to them if they just show up and start hearing about this. And I think it's time for them that we start having this work session before them, so they all begin to fully understand a project of this magnitude that is being proposed here in our northern community of Clabato and Northern Agency. and also provide the same presentation to the Northern Agency Council on a separate day, just totally focused on this project. So they are well informed and they might support it when it comes down to it and have a supporting resolution in place as well. It is a big project, and something like this starts from the local level as it grows to the agency and then to the full Navajo Nation Council. In between, prior to the Navajo Nation Council, it will be the Resources and Development Committee who oversees energies as well. And then if there are any waivers, limited waivers of sovereign immunity, then it will go to the full Navajo Nation Council. We will have our attorneys from our Office of Legislative Counsel, as well as the Department of Justice and Division of Natural Resources, that need to be at the table during this presentation. Now that we're at the initial beginning stages, the genesis of this now, leadership just needs to be well informed from RDC. And I'm glad that we have Honorable Crotty on the call with us today, and Honorable So. They will be the leaders that pretty much have received this information right now. We just need to start having the full council be knowledgeable of this, but having a big meeting at Twin Arrows would probably be the next step for recommendations and follow-up, and have a full day meeting and discussion on this project, and to always include the Excavated chapter, because it's going to happen within their service boundary area as well. So that I would like to say. And let me ask again, honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions?
Chairman Nez, this is Delegate Crotty. May I ask a question?
Yes, you're more than welcome to ask a question at this time, since there's none from my colleagues of RDC. Honorable Crotty, go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman Nez and Resource and Development Committee members. If I can ask, while I'm looking at the maps, I'm just looking at slide 6 of the 23 slides. Another area, if I could get land department, we just need to confirm that those chapter service areas are correct, and understanding that they'll be meeting with Red Valley chapter tomorrow. I'm looking at the maps, and I believe that Cove is involved in this conversation. So if we could get that verification through our land department. And I do see that our EPA, Navajo Nation EPA director, received this presentation. This area is also, and the families there have been impacted by uranium. So there's natural occurring uranium, and I would like to get some insight from our Navajo EPA in terms of these sites that are selected. What is going to be that impact? Especially with the amount of dirt that would be, we're talking about tunnels within this mountain. So I need to know a little bit more in terms of that impact, because so many of these families were in the uranium mines and are just still trying to get relief from that last energy extraction. If that could be possible, Chair, I'd appreciate that information. Thank you.
Kinetic Energy, Tom, Tracy.
Tracy, are you still with us? He might have dropped off.
Can you hear me? I'm still here.
Would you tackle those two questions from Honorable Crotty, please?
Yes, thanks, Honorable Crotty. The uranium mines, we've mapped out all the uranium mines from the EPA maps. There are some old mines nearby the lower reservoir. They're not inside the containment area of the reservoir. They're upstream. They're smaller. They are some of the smaller ones that have been mitigated to some degree, not like some of the others that I'm sure you're aware of that are requiring removal of massive amounts of material. So we can review those with the committee, and I think we can get some at least general ideas of the extent of where the uranium mines are and whether there's a potential issue there from tailings. I can tell you that the aggregate areas and sand areas for cement or embankment are being proposed in areas that are not near any uranium mines at present. So we have maps for those locations, potential locations we can review as well. Back to you, Chairman.
Tracy, I think there was a question there. In the excavation, will there be, of the tunnels and the powerhouse, do we know if there's any uranium impact, radiation impact from those excavations?
I believe Mr. Halona from Land Department could answer some of those questions. Mr. Halona?
Thank you, Chairman Nez. And Delegate Crotty, you're right. We need to look at the chapter service areas are actually different. I think they're using the pre-1980 map. So we can provide that correct information. Second is that that's one of the things I guess the nation should be aware of, is that the mining sites that are on that side of the Carrizo Mountains, above the top of that whole area. So, that's probably something EPA, Navajo EPA would be collaborating on as well. So there is a lot. And then from the biological side, you look at all the transmission lines, the Mesa Verde cacti is a big concern through that whole area there. So there's a lot of different things that would have to be evaluated, which I think they're saying is that they need a cooperative agreement to get some money to determine all of that. So that's something I think the nation can entertain and evaluate with all of the appropriate departments and divisions internally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halona, for that. Ms. Daisy from EPA, would you like to add anything?
Chair, this is Valinda.
You may
Can you hear me?
Speak.
Okay, terrific. I understand that there was a question on hazardous waste. So just a quick response to Delegate Crotty and to the honorable members of RDC today. As far as hazardous waste is concerned, my recommendation from Navajo EPA is that we not do what we did with some of the other power plants and some of the other facilities here on the Navajo Nation. What I mean by that is, for instance, at some power plants, Navajo EPA doesn't have jurisdiction. And so my recommendation, if we were to do or to continue looking at this proposal by Kinetic Powers, is that Navajo EPA continue to have jurisdiction. And then as far as hazardous waste is concerned specifically, there are federal regulations that would apply to this facility. And then assuming that the council and the Navajo Nation chooses to have Navajo EPA as part of these discussions, our Navajo Nation CERCLA laws would apply. And then within the Navajo Circle laws and within the federal laws, there are a list of hazardous wastes that we would monitor and track. And then we would be working with Kinetic Powers or whoever the consultants or contractors are to ensure that those hazardous wastes are within either the limits or that they are being taken to a licensed facility, for instance. I hope that answers Delegate Crotty's question, but I can certainly ask if there's any other additional questions, or if I was unclear, please let me know.
Thank you. Honorable Crotty, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you, Chairman Nez and RDC committee. So the request for Shadeja, Ms. Shirley, is if you can have your CERCLA team review the PowerPoint presentation and the areas that have been identified. That would be helpful in terms of any type of impact. What I want to say is just even looking at this slide 6, the key, like if you look at that new substation, I mean, that reminds me of like the uranium sign. I know it's missing one other little component, and I just think being sensitive to the community that as we discuss this in the and the possibilities is also looking at what we could do just to make sure if there's any concerns that we know up front. So thank you, Chairman. If we could continue in these discussions to have Navajo EPA part of that dialogue, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Crotty. As I stated, I believe we need to have a follow-up meeting to invite everybody to the table to provide their response to questions concerned by leadership. And when we do have that work session at Twin Arrows, we'll have a big enough space for folks to participate. We will have honorable members of RDC as well as council members who wish to attend, such as yourself. We'll have our Office of Legislative Counsel there, as well as Department of Justice, EPA, Division of Natural Resources, OPVP, and also Excavated chapter officials, so they can be a part of this conversation that is very important, that they need to be well aware of as well. So thank you for that. Honorable Vice Chair Walker.
Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Earlier, I guess I was on mute and I was asking for your recognition there. Nonetheless, thank you for this time, Mr. Chairman and committee members and honorable colleagues that are with us on this call. The audience, the listening audience that we have also, I send greetings from Western Navajo Agency. The presenters also, expressed by colleagues here, council members, information is of high interest. Information is very critical to ideas, to concepts, to potentially developing on Navajo land for the purpose of revenue generation. Of course, that covers a wide area. Revenue touches every aspect, every segment of Navajo communities, Navajo Nation, Navajo Lifeways. The revenue is that way, but it's not the only thing that we hold high in value. The land itself is the assets. Then the contents of land and everything on the surface is assets to Navajo. So
Ikea. I want to say that to begin with, and then I represent 5 communities out in Western Navajo Agency. Those communities are Loop, Bird Springs, Tulani, Lake Cameron, and Coal Mine Canyon chapters. I was looking at the slideshow here, the presentation, page 11. There's a comparison there, between 2 jobs, two projects, I mean. So I want to say that it's somewhat concerning to me, and most likely, with a high likelihood that it would be concerning to members of the communities that I represent out west, in particular Cameron, the neighboring Bodaway Gap, as page 11 shows a project that's been introduced, or at least in concept and in theory, in proposals in our area. And I want to mention here on this call and let leadership know there are chapter resolutions that strongly oppose that development that's listed on page 11, not the Carrizo, but the other one. I would be careful in making these public presentations, including that project in the way we're doing it now, because it almost sounds like a viable project that has potential and that has support. In reality, it does not have that support. Navajo Nation does have a letter going to the federal government, federal agencies that govern this area of energy development, in particular the power storage industry. So Navajo Nation's letter opposes this project that's on this PowerPoint presentation. Again, to the presenters and leadership, I would be cautious in saying, okay, here's another project and here's the differences, here's the similarities. While in reality, that project, there is strong opposition. Navajo Nation, though, local communities. I don't know how else to say that, but just to say it directly. With respect to my leadership here, if I had seen this PowerPoint prior to the meeting here, that's what I would caution our staff and the committee on. So, although the other comment I want to make is the presentation itself. One of those leaders that has 2 ways of looking at information, 2 ways receiving it, processing it, and then representing it to constituents or to other leaders. And that's the English version. Then, of course, in our own Navajo, the Nebazat, our Navajo language. So I'm thinking, how would it sound in the Navajo version, the presentation, and so forth, and what kinds of discussion would it prompt if we had heard it all in Navajo? And that's just a comment I want to make. Chairman, you had indicated that we could have another follow-up discussion, a bigger meeting. Maybe that we could include that, Navajo translated information and a Navajo discussion, because this is Navajo. This is all Navajo. But echo. Ashan Ninan Ben Yedo Yar Beso Bedo Nipen Yende. John Sigi Hilakes and Laquage. About this, the chairman, I appreciate the time given to me here. I didn't introduce myself earlier. Again, this is Thomas Walker, Vice Chairman of the Resource Development Committee. And I did not receive the first part of the presentation. I had joined later due to other commitments and obligations I had earlier. Chairman, so I want to make those comments, and I appreciate the time here. Yeah, also thank you to the presenters for taking the time to do this big presentation, important presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a project that's alluded to or referenced that's no one from that party ever came to us, not even a whisper came from those parties and said we have an interest in developing a project. I don't know if they're listening. I hope they're listening. You know, people tend to do that also. Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question, it's just a comment. So therefore, I don't require a response. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chair Walker, for your comment. The concerns you've raised, we most definitely will not make any decision until all the local communities are well informed that will be affected by this project. And I think this is where we need to have that larger meeting, and not just a teleconference meeting, but a meeting where we're all sitting at the table and asking questions. And I've named numerous divisions to be present there to learn and to participate as well. And added to that would be Four Corners Economic Development Planners at the table also with us at that time, and we can have a very good understanding of this project that is being proposed at Clabato on the Navajo Nation, on the Navajo Nation portion of Northern Agency. So let me go to Honorable Oroso.
Thank you very much. Just two questions. One question is basically how many acre of land are you projecting to utilize in each of the ponds or the reservoir? And that will also give me a picture of the the size. I guess square acres would be suffice. The other is with this reservoir, is there thinking and planning of allowing some sort of recreation as this is generated? If this proposal goes through, the nation looks at other type of revenues within its land, and a lot of what I see is that we lack some small sort of outdoor recreation areas on Navajo because of development, and this would precisely try to at least help with outdoor recreation for the Navajo citizens that live within the region, or that's just traveling by. You know, the other thing too is, you know, I know it's a hydro plant, so it's and with that, you know, other type of mechanism, economic development within the region there. So, you know, like a camping ground, if it could be entertained, where the nation has full control of those campsites. And I think, and then the recreation area or some sort of MOU or agreement could happen so that, those type of activities could at least benefit the nation in the returns, in the terms of I guess, how can I say, fishing, paddle boarding. People, I see a lot of people paddle boarding. You go to Farmington Lake, and I believe Farmington Lake is built in that same manner. I don't know what the dynamics is, but there's a lake there, and it's I think it's generating electricity. I don't know, but that would be a very, very good place to do that there. But you have that economic development there, such as boat logging, boat docking places, and can even, like I said, campgrounds and so forth. And those are just some of the thoughts that I have within that possible opportunity if this project moves forth with all clearances, if it clears the clearances on that project. So that's all we're going to ask for now, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable So. If you look at slide number 5, 392 acres because out of the lower reservoir, 534 because but I'll have kinetic energy respond also. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Liz and Vice Chairman Walker and Honorable Tissot. The very short answer to the question that was just raised about recreation and other opportunities, the very short answer is absolutely. Subject to any safety concerns, and keep in mind that these reservoirs do go up and down. Twice a year, the upper reservoir will actually completely fill the lower, and twice a year be pumped back up. So the upper reservoir gets drawn down in the June, July, August timeframe, pumped back up in September, and then it gets drawn down again in the December, January timeframe and gets pumped back up in March. In addition to that seasonal behavior of these reservoirs, there is daily up and down, but which is much less severe. And so just keeping in mind, extreme concern about safety, we are just 100% in support of all the recreation opportunities that you just spoke about. And I quite frankly see no constraints whatsoever to doing that. And I'd like to actually make one comment also to the Honorable Vice Chairman Walker. Thank you for your comments on the presentation, and especially to that slide 11 where we brought up this other project that was proposed on the nation. We are not in the business of trying to criticize or impede or oppose any other project on the Navajo Nation. We included that information, and we will delete it from all future slide decks, but we included that information because we actually, as we've spoken with the various departments in the nation and some of the other chapters, we always get the question, oh, well, we heard about this project over in Little Canyon and Lake Powell and all the opposition it's generated. How are you different? But if it is not helpful to cover that information, again, it is absolutely not our job to render opinion on that project, and we will delete that information.
Thank you. Honorable So, your follow-up.
Thank you very much. Also, as you're talking about, it looks like you're going to be pumping from the San Juan River. And the San Juan River has water right users. Will you be going to the water right users for their approval for utilizing the water? Because with the San Juan River water settlement, there's water right users that have been identified. And just wondering if you have that in your past to start looking at the getting approval from the water right users. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Honorable Shaw. With that question, we also have on the call with us from the Water Rights Commission, Dr. Tuli Cordova is on the call with us as well. So let me go back to the presenter and then I'll give some time over to Dr. Tuli Cordova. Presenter?
Tracy, would you please address that question?
Yes, at a high level, we are anticipating that this project would be successful absolutely only with the use of existing Navajo tribal water that is currently not being used or anticipated being used in the future. As part of that, that means that we would be using water and rediverting water from other locations for use down the San Juan River. And the intent would be to have no impacts on existing river users below Navajo Dam. As part of that also, there is a stream flow requirement with a lot of parties involved, including the tribe and including the federal agencies like Fish and Wildlife, on stream flow volume requirements in certain seasons for protection of species. And we intend to design the pumping facilities so that would have minimal impact on stream flows and trying to anticipate when high water would be flowing to pump as much as we could during those times and having less impact in other seasons. Now, that's all subject to evaluation and discussion and a lot of parties, but that would be the intent, is to have no impact on downstream users. That to me and Tom, and I believe with this committee, is probably sacrosanct that we wouldn't have those effects. Back to you, Chairman.
Dr. Tuli Cordova, are you still on the call? None? Okay. Let me move on to P&M. Mr. Pete Etzity.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Nez and members of the RDC committee. And just to briefly touch on a couple of things and kind of put some things into perspective. As Mr. Conroy had indicated, that public service company in Mexico, of course, does have some interest, but as he had shown in the slide deck there, that P&M would be a potential off-taker. And again, a project of this size would be considered a large utility scale project. And what Mr. Conroy had mentioned earlier, with many investor utilities such as P&M, projects like this are very difficult to try to push because of the capital that's needed for a project of this size and the megawatts, but also he indicated some of the regulatory challenges. But again, he mentioned some of the things that could be considered as far as being an off-taker. And of course, with P&M and it's being in the state of New Mexico, as you recall, the Energy Transition Act of 2019 put in place some timelines with regard to moving toward renewable energy, zero carbon emissions, and there are some target timelines. Of course, the 50% by 2030, the 80% by 2040, and basically basically zero carbon by 2050. And again, in meeting some of those challenges of having those replacement resources, he indicated the life expectancy of the project in comparison to other sources such as solar, wind. One of the things that PNM has looked at as far as a replacement generation source is battery. But, you know, a lot of that is tied into what technology is made available. And the reason why I'm trying to touch on several different issues is PNM being a investor-owned utility, we also have to go through a process of putting together an integrated resource plan. And basically what that entails is how PNM intends to operate, how it intends to have that generation or the replacement generation, or how it's going to serve its customers. And there are different phases to that. You know, you look at 5-year cycle, a 10-year cycle, a 20-year cycle. So tying into what Mr. Conroy had presented is you have to look at these long-range timelines for planning and to look for those resources to replace. Of course, PNM is a participant in, or owner and operator and a participant in San Juan Generating Station, and is also a participant in Four Corners Power Plant. And going back to those two facilities, they do have a life expectancy which is within this 10-year time period, to where those that are participants and utilize those facilities for getting megawatts in the form of power, we have to begin to look at where those replacement resources are. In this case, this could be an opportunity where PNM would be an off-taker, and basically would be taking that power off the market, which again is a whole nother regulatory process that we would have to plan for. So again, you have to look at these timelines and understand that part of that again is based on meeting what we used to think of peak load. The other is meeting certain margins, and also again there are also system requirements for transmission to ensure that there are no issues. And going back as what Mr. Conroy indicated is that the amount of megawatts that could be provided over a 70-hour period can be beneficial in comparison to the technology that's in place right now. When you look at solar, wind, and battery, which are intermittent. So he mentioned some of the megawatts that we would need to ensure that we meet our system requirements as well, and the overall grid requirements. The other, you have to look at the bigger picture and moving forward is capacity on the system, and capacity that you look at as far as what the Honorable Tom Taylor had mentioned is looking at it from an economic standpoint. In order to have community development, to have economic development, you also have to take into consideration of meeting the capacity demands. And you see some of those in the metro areas. You see it in the Albuquerque area with a lot of the economic development that's happening, and it's all based upon the capacity. Meeting that capacity demand for that kind of economic activity or large economic activity. But again, he mentioned the FERC process. I think for the parties involved, yeah, they would have to take those into consideration. And again, I just wanted to provide a little background on that, and just for understanding. And again, that interest is not only from PNM, but others will also look at alternative options for being an off-taker, purchasing power off the market. So I'll turn it over, and those were just a few comments to shed some light on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atchity, for that. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any other comments or questions? None. Let me go back to the presenter.
Chairman Nez, this is Delegate Crotty.
Honorable Crotty, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. RDC committee members. Tim, can you let me know in terms of who you're meeting with Red Valley chapter? While this presentation was taking place, the chapter had their monthly planning meeting. And when I reached out, it doesn't look like all of the chapter officials have that information for the meeting tomorrow. And I looked in my email and I don't see information for the meeting tomorrow. Can you send that out and we could just make sure they have the information they need for tomorrow's meeting? Thank you.
Honorable Crotty, what meeting are you talking about?
Shiaj, I wrote down and I saw on the timeline on their slides that they'll be meeting with Red Valley chapter.
Okay, let me go back to the presenter.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Nez. Honorable Crotty, yes, we have interacted with, I believe she's, I don't have my phone with me to look it up, but I believe that it's the administrator over there. We set this meeting up last week. It is for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I did receive confirmation that she confirmed the meeting. And I will, though, absolutely, as soon as I get to my computer, I will also copy you on the information. I'm sorry, I don't remember the woman's name who I worked with on that right now.
Thank you for that. I just saw the date on here too, so that would be great to let the local chapters like Gutty Eye also be aware, and perhaps also Shiprock chapter. And in the future, since the transmission lines are headed this way, the San Juan chapter and Inanizad have them involved, as well as the other side of the river at Hogback, since it's going to PNM as well. So just when you have time, be sure to contact those chapters. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions? I hear none. Thank you very much. I believe we're done. We started at 9 o'clock this morning. We've had a 3.5 hour discussion, receiving and absorbing these very important information related to a proposed hydroelectric project at Clabato. Moving forward, recommendations and follow-up is to have a larger meeting at Twin Arrows Navajo Casino Resort, an in-person meeting with RDC, and any members of the council are welcome to attend. And most likely, Honorable Crotty, if you are available, and your chapter officials from the Clabato, that would be great to be there. We will have our Office of Legislative Counsel, as well as Department of Justice, DNR, Division of Natural Resources, the Office of the President, Vice President, Four Corners Economic Development, as well as Division of Economic Development Office, and Navajo EPA. So thank you, presenters. Tom Conroy, Tracy Livingston, Mr. Honorable Tom Taylor, and Sago. Thank you very much. I believe we're done. It is currently 12:34 p.m. We will adjourn at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and
You all
committee,
be safe, and
everyone.
You all be safe, and may God bless every one of you. Thank you.